An old woman is ridiculed at the shooting range, but she taught a lesson with a single shot. They laughed when the old lady picked up the gun with trembling hands. They stopped laughing when she hit the perfect target with a single shot. Subscribe if this story finds you and let me know where in the world you're watching from. The silence that precedes an accurate shot carries more power than the blast that follows it. At the exclusive Eagle's Nest Shooting Club, frequented by the elite of Lexington, Kentucky, Sarah Mitchell, a 76-year-old woman with simple clothes and time-worn hands, walked with hesitant steps through the ornate entrance hall. Her presence immediately caused looks of bewilderment as if a sparrow had landed in the middle of a peacock parade. Sarah adjusted her old-fashioned glasses on her nose and clutched her worn leather purse to her chest. The gift certificate in her hands, a birthday present from her grandson, entitled her to a shooting lesson. She had never set foot in such an opulent place, with walls covered in fine wood and gleaming trophies displayed in crystal cases. "May I help you, ma'am?" asked the receptionist, with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have a class scheduled for today," replied Sarah, her soft voice contradicting the austere environment. "My grandson gave me this gift. I never thought I'd be in a place like this at my age." The receptionist examined the gift certificate with an arched eyebrow, as if checking a counterfeit note. "Yes, everything is in order. Please wait over there. The instructor will come for you shortly." Sarah sat on one of the leather sofas, feeling out of place amid the luxury that surrounded her. Not far away, a group of well-dressed men, all in their 50s, conversed in an animated tone, drinking whiskey while waiting their turn at the shooting range. "Look what we have here," commented one of them, not bothering to lower his voice. "I think someone got lost on the way to bingo." The others laughed, discreetly, glancing in the elderly woman's direction. "I imagine it's guided tour day for the local nursing home," added another, provoking more laughter. Richard Blackwood, the owner of the establishment and a well-known real estate investor in the region, approached the group with a condescending smile. Tall and imposing in his tailored suit, he represented everything his club symbolized: power, privilege, and exclusivity. "Gentlemen, I see you've noticed our unusual visitor. I'm afraid we'll have to start being more selective with our gift certificates." Sarah heard it all, her gaze fixed on her wrinkled hands. Decades of experience had taught her that sometimes silence was the best response to arrogance. When the instructor finally appeared, he was a young man named Tyler, no more than 30 years old, with a bored expression on his face. He looked at Sarah as if she were an inconvenience he had to tolerate. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Tyler, your instructor today. Let's start with the basics, since I imagine you've never held a gun before, am I right?" Before Sarah could respond, Richard interrupted. "Tyler, maybe it's better to start with something really simple. We don't want accidents." He turned to Sarah with an artificial smile. "You understand, don't you? Safety first." "Of course," replied Sarah with a nod, her calm voice masking her discomfort. Tyler led her to a room separate from the main shooting range, where the other men would continue to practice with larger caliber weapons. It was an area clearly intended for complete beginners, with targets positioned at a minimum distance. "Let's start with this," said Tyler, handing her a small caliber pistol. "It's a .22, practically no recoil. Perfect, for someone in your situation." Sarah took the gun carefully, her wrinkled fingers wrapping around the grip with a delicacy that the instructor interpreted as insecurity. "Be careful not to drop it," commented Tyler in a tone one would use with a child. While Tyler explained the basic fundamentals of shooting as if he were talking to a child, the group of men, including Richard, observed from the door, exchanging comments and smiles. The room had a glass wall that allowed other clients to view the training sessions, turning Sarah's class into a spectacle for others' amusement. "I bet $20 she doesn't even hit the target," said one of them. I bet 50 that she drops the gun after the first shot, replied another, provoking more laughter. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the target, apparently oblivious to the comments, but every word was registered. Tyler positioned himself behind her, adjusting her posture with impatience. No, Mrs. Mitchell, don't hold it like that. Like this, he corrected, moving her hands abruptly. And remember to breathe. Many beginners hold their breath. Thank you for the guidance, replied Sarah softly, adjusting her glasses. When she finally took her first shot, it was weak and erratic, hitting the extreme edge of the target. The men at the door laughed openly. I think I'm going to win that bet, commented Richard, not bothering to lower his voice. After the first session, humiliatingly brief, Sarah was led back to the reception. Tyler had ended the class before the scheduled time, claiming it would be better for her to rest. Perhaps you'd like to come back another day when you're feeling more up to it, he suggested, with false concern. Sarah nodded silently, but instead of heading for the exit, she sat down again on the sofa. The gift certificate included a second session, and she had no intention of wasting it. Richard approached, with an expression of mild irritation at seeing her still there. Mrs. Mitchell, don't feel obligated to use your entire certificate today. We can schedule for another time, when perhaps you can bring someone more suitable to accompany you. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackwood, replied Sarah, surprising him by knowing his name, but I prefer to continue, if it's not an inconvenience. My grandson would be disappointed if I didn't fully enjoy his gift. Richard nodded stiffly and moved away to join his friends, who were now practicing with precision rifles on the main shooting range. She's persistent, I have to admit, commented one of them. She has courage for a lady of her age. Courage is not the same as skill, replied Richard, observing her with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Some people simply don't know how to recognize their limitations. During the break between sessions, Sarah remained seated, discreetly observing the dynamics of the club. Occasionally, she consulted her old wristwatch, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Angela Blackwood, Richard's wife, who had just arrived at the club. Who is that lady? Angela asked her husband, her voice an audible whisper. Nobody important, replied Richard. Just an elderly lady with a gift certificate. Tyler is handling her. Angela studied Sarah for a moment with a curious expression. There's something familiar about her, she commented. I'm sure I've seen her somewhere before. Richard dismissed the comment with an impatient gesture. Unlikely. She's not from our social circle. Meanwhile, Tyler was talking with one of the club's employees, clearly bored with his assignment for the day. Another hour with Grandma, he lamented. She can barely hold the gun without shaking. What no one noticed was the slight smile that appeared on Sarah's lips upon hearing these comments, or the firmness with which her fingers momentarily stopped trembling. When the second session was about to begin, Richard had an idea that he considered amusing. He approached Sarah with a smile that tried to appear friendly, but barely disguised his condescension. Mrs. Mitchell, we were thinking of making your experience more interesting, he began. How about participating in a friendly little competition? Nothing serious, of course, just to add a bit of fun to your visit. Sarah looked at him with a serene expression. What kind of competition, Mr. Blackwood? Something simple. A single shot. The person who manages to hit closest to the center of the target wins. I'll participate myself to make it fair. What he wasn't saying was that, as the club owner, he practiced shooting almost daily and was considered one of the best shooters among the members. The other men watched the scene, exchanging amused glances. It was obvious that the proposal wasn't fair at all. It was just another way to humiliate the elderly woman. And what would we win in this competition? Asked Sarah, surprising them with her willingness to accept the challenge. Richard, momentarily disconcerted, replied, well, if you win, the club will offer a year of free membership. And if I win, let's say you'll provide us with a good story to tell. Sarah adjusted her glasses and nodded. Seems fair. I accept the challenge. News of the unusual challenge spread quickly throughout the club. In minutes, several members had gathered to watch what promised to be a spectacle of humiliation. Tyler seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but didn't dare contradict his boss. Mr. Blackwood, are you sure about this? Mrs. Mitchell is a complete beginner. She accepted the challenge, Tyler Richard cut in. Besides, it's just a harmless joke. Isn't it, Mrs. Mitchell? Sarah just smiled, her blue eyes shining behind her glasses. What weapon will we use? She asked calmly. Richard gestured toward a display case where several weapons were exhibited. Why don't you choose, Mrs. Mitchell? After all, we want to be fair. The sarcasm in his voice was evident to everyone, except perhaps to himself. Sarah approached the display case slowly, her eyes scanning the various options with an attention that surprised some of the more perceptive observers. After a few moments, she pointed to a Remington 700 precision rifle. This will do, she said simply. Richard couldn't hide his surprise. It was a sophisticated choice for a beginner, but he quickly regained his composure. Excellent choice. Now, let's establish the distance. How about 100 yards? 200 would be more appropriate to test true precision, don't you think? Suggested Sarah. A murmur ran through the audience. 200 yards was a considerable distance, even for experienced shooters. 200 yards it is, agreed Richard, certain of his victory. The club's outdoor shooting range was prepared for the unlikely duel. 2 targets were positioned 200 yards away, and a small crowd of club members had gathered to watch. Side bets were discreetly made, all favoring Richard by absurd margins. Who goes first? Asked Tyler, who had been designated as the impromptu judge of the competition. Ladies first, replied Richard with an exaggerated bow. Sarah nodded and approached the shooting position. Tyler offered help, but she gently refused. Thank you, dear, but I think I can manage. What happened next left all those present in silence. Sarah positioned herself with a completely different posture than she had demonstrated previously. There was no tremor in her hands as she prepared the rifle. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost mechanical in their perfection. She adjusted the scope with evident knowledge, checked the wind direction with an experienced look, and breathed deeply. When she finally pulled the trigger, the sound of the shot seemed louder than normal in the tense silence that had settled. Tyler, using binoculars, was speechless. Perfect center, literally in the middle of the target. The crowd remained in stunned silence as Sarah quietly moved away from the shooting position, giving way to Richard. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but his hand trembled slightly as he picked up the rifle. What had begun as a cruel joke had transformed into something completely different. He positioned himself, took a deep breath to calm down, and took his shot. Good shot, announced Tyler after checking with the binoculars. Practically in the center, but slightly deviated to the right. There was no doubt Sarah had won. Richard turned to her, his face a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. How? It was at this moment that Angela Blackwood, who had been observing the scene with growing perplexity, finally made the connection. Wait a minute. Sarah Mitchell, the Sarah Mitchell from the 1968 Olympic. A murmur of surprise ran through the group. Sarah smiled slightly and removed her glasses, revealing a firm and confident look that contrasted dramatically with the fragility she had appeared to have until then. Actually, 1964, 1968, and 1972, she corrected softly. I retired after Munich. Richard looked as if he had been struck by lightning. You are that Sarah Mitchell, the gold medalist? 3-time gold medalist, completed Angela, her voice now laden with admiration. Richard, we're in the presence of an American sports shooting legend. The entire club seemed to have been hit by a shockwave. The men who had previously mocked the little old lady now found themselves speechless, trying to process the information. "But why didn't you say anything?" asked Richard, still stunned. Sarah looked at him with a serene expression, but her eyes conveyed decades of wisdom and experience. "When my grandson gave me this gift certificate, I thought it would be a good opportunity to get back to practicing after so many years. I didn't come looking for recognition or special treatment. I preferred to observe how people really treat others when they believe they have nothing to gain from them." Her words hung in the air like a silent judgment. Some of those present had the decency to look ashamed, while others were still trying to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. "Besides," continued Sarah, "I've always believed that a person's character is revealed not by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat those they consider inferior." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. For the first time in many years, the powerful businessman was completely speechless. Tyler, the young instructor, seemed the most shaken of all. He approached Sarah with an expression of deep regret. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't know what to say. You're the reason I started practicing shooting. I have a poster of you in my room, from the '72 Olympic team. I never imagined—" Sarah smiled gently. "Don't worry, young man. We all make errors in judgment." Angela Blackwood, recovering from the initial surprise, hurried to rectify the situation. "Sarah, please accept our sincerest apologies for the inadequate treatment. Richard and I would be honored if you would accept not only a free membership, but also if you would consider teaching some special classes for our members." Richard, still visibly shaken, merely nodded in agreement. The arrogant and self-assured man had disappeared, replaced by someone who had just received a profound lesson in humility. "Actually," said one of the other members, approaching timidly, "my daughter is beginning to take an interest in sport shooting. It would be an incredible honor if you could offer her some guidance." In the minutes that followed, the atmosphere in the club transformed completely. People who had previously avoided her now approached to greet her, ask questions, or simply express admiration. Sarah responded to everyone with the same gentleness she had demonstrated from the beginning, without a trace of resentment. Richard remained apart, observing the scene with a contemplative expression. When he finally approached Sarah again, there was something different in his posture, a humility that his closest friends had never seen before. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance, "I'd like to show you something if you'll allow me." Sarah nodded, curious, and followed Richard to a room at the back of the club that she hadn't yet seen. It was a small gallery of trophies and sports shooting memorabilia, and there, in a central display case, was a framed photograph of the 1968 Olympic team, with a young Sarah Mitchell in the center, gold medal hanging around her neck. "This photograph has been here since I opened the club 15 years ago," explained Richard. "I admired it without ever imagining that one day the person depicted in it would be here, being treated the way we treated you today." Back in the main hall, Richard gathered all the staff and members present. With a dignity that surprised even his wife, he did something that few had seen him do before. He apologized publicly. "Today we all learned a valuable lesson," he declared, "and I, more than anyone, Eagle's Nest was founded with the purpose of celebrating excellence. But at some point, we confused excellence with exclusivity, based on appearances and social status. From today that changes." Sarah observed silently, her serene face revealing little of her internal thoughts. When Richard finished his speech, he turned directly to her. "Mrs. Mitchell, once again, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you received today. I would like to officially invite you to be our honorary consultant, helping to remodel the values and practices of this club." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Sarah thought for a moment before responding. "I accept your invitation, Mr. Blackwood. With one condition, she finally said, that the club opens its doors for community programs, offering free classes for young people from all social backgrounds who demonstrate genuine interest in the sport. Richard hesitated for only a second before extending his hand. Consider it done. Weeks later, Eagle's Nest was unrecognizable, following Sarah's guidance. The club had implemented several community outreach programs. Young people from less privileged neighborhoods received free training on Saturdays, and a new atmosphere of inclusion and respect had replaced the previous elitism. Sarah personally supervised many of the training sessions, sharing not only shooting techniques, but also the life lessons she had accumulated over decades of international competition. On a particularly busy afternoon, Richard found Sarah observing a group of new shooters, a satisfied smile on her wrinkled face. "You know, Mrs. Mitchell," he commented, "that single shot you took that day changed more than just the course of an unlikely competition." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The most important shots we take in life are rarely those that hit paper targets, Mr. Blackwood." "I will never forget that moment," continued Richard, "not just for the precision of the shot, but for what it represented. You could have humiliated us much more than we did you, but you chose the path of dignity. True victory is never in humiliating others even when we have the power to do so," replied Sarah. "It's in elevating them, in showing them that they can be better than they thought they could be." As they watched the young shooters practicing enthusiastically, Richard reflected on how a single encounter, a single moment of revelation, had transformed not only his club, but his own worldview. Sarah Mitchell, with her single and perfect shot, had hit much more than the center of a distant target. She had struck at the heart of an ingrained prejudice, triggering waves of change that would continue to spread far beyond those walls. And for the elderly woman who was once looked down upon as soon as she walked through the doors of Eagle's Nest, that may have been the most significant medal of all. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart, I invite you to keep this faith alive with us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any stories that touch the soul. And if this story has moved you, give it a like so we can continue sharing more stories like this one made with all our hearts. Until next time.